have with us now the host of the What Bitcoin Did podcast, Mr. Peter McCormack. Pete, how you doing?
I'm good, man. How are you guys doing? How's it all going?
It's going great. You got thousands of people watching, and I'm sure that this is going all around the world, and people are excited to hear about what you've been up to, because you did something recently that really gained the admiration of a lot of people. Not that we didn't admire you already, but you went to South America and frequented several countries to discover what's really going on in the ground there, and what, in their economy, what do they understand about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and how many bolivar does it take to buy a loaf of bread?
Yeah. Been traveling a bit. I'll tell you why I did it, because a lot of people talk about what Bitcoin is and what it does. And we have a lot of people, like where you are in the US or where I'm in the UK, we're mainly speculators, right? We're speculating on the use case, using it a little bit. I don't know about you guys. I do a bit of invoicing or pay some people in Bitcoin. But we talk about like the future. They can take down central banks. It can bank the unbanked, all these kind of things. So I was like, I want to see outside of my sphere. I spend most of my time either in the UK or in your home country in the US. And we're kind of some of the most privileged people, right? Get to live in relatively stable places, not under some authoritarian regime. So I was like, all right, I want to go and find out, see how people are using Bitcoin in these other countries. I should have been in Africa through most of April. That was the plan. Obviously, with the virus, I can't travel. But the plan was to just work my way around the world this year. So I'd been to South America in December. I had gone out to Uruguay for the La BitConf. And while I was there, I spent some time in Bolivia and El Salvador. I saw a Bitcoin project in El Salvador where this guy is kind of cool. This guy's Michael. Michael Peterson. He's like a Californian guy. He's a Christian. He moved to El Salvador on a mission in a good surf town because he loves to surf. And then he built up this project whereby local kids, to try and keep them out of gangs, the local kind of rivers, or teach people to surf or lifeguard, all these different things, and they would pay them in Bitcoin. And then what he did, he's got the local stores, which are like shacks or mud huts or roadside cafes or little stores, and got them to accept Bitcoin. So he created this little Bitcoin community, and it had a couple of goals. One was to get these kids away from the gangs, which is a massive problem in El Salvador with 18th Street and MS-13. And secondly was to teach them about Bitcoin and saving, because there isn't a culture of saving. So I was like, this is really cool. So I was really interested in it. And then while I was hanging around with them, I was kind of like, right, hold on, there's a couple of issues here. Firstly, you're paying them all in Bitcoin, which is cool. They all come at the end of the week, they log their hours, and they put out their phone, they get paid their sats. But I was like, what are these people doing in terms of managing their private keys? What are they doing in terms of security? Because these aren't people who can go back to their house and get a bill file and record what their seed is and hide it in a hidden place in the house, and then have a second one at their mum's. These people are they live in shacks and huts that someone can just push the door down and walk in and steal it. So what are they doing there in terms of, or what do we have here in terms of private key management for them? And I don't have the answer. I don't have the solution, because all the private key management solution I've seen tend to be more suited for wealthy Western speculators who live in relatively safe environments. They're not set up for people in El Salvador. So that really struck me, that if we talk about banking the unbanked, these people are essentially banked now, limited amount. They don't have a bank account, but they do have a Bitcoin wallet where they get sats and they use it. They essentially have a form of banking, a starting point.
So what do they do for security? Like, how do they manage that? They just, like, if they lose their Bitcoin, they're just out of luck, just like everybody else, I guess, huh?
Yeah, if they do, they do. And look, we're not talking about a lot. We're talking about they maybe earning like $100 in a week or in a couple of weeks, and using that to buy sweets and food and maybe help with their family, because it's quite a poor area. So that might help their family with buying food. And I guess the idea is, look, if they lost their phone or it got corrupted. Oh, fuck, I've only lost $100. But just say in that week we go through some kind of crazy bull run or they are putting a bit by and that $100 becomes $1,000, suddenly it's a serious amount of money and they are not practicing very strong security. Look, we've all got one, right? You've got a security procedure. I've got one. We've all read the tips and the kind of things we should do, from seed phrases to multi-sig, things like CASA. None of this is set up for people living in the poorest parts of El Salvador. But the main thing for me there was like, okay, nobody's talking about this. I think it might be interesting to start going around the world and seeing how people are using Bitcoin. So that was the plan, guys. This year, it was the plan to do South America, Africa in April. I was then going to go to India, then go to Asia. And right now, I don't know when I can travel. So I've put a few shows out. I do these Bitcoin around the world shows, and I've put a few out. But like the whole plan to keep traveling is gone. But the need to have the debate isn't. The need to have the debate about Bitcoin usage in other countries still exists. The only sad thing about it actually is these shows also, these location ones, tend to do 20 to 30% less downloads than my normal show, which I actually find a bit sad because I think this is like really interesting use cases. Like I interviewed a guy the other day. This is a mad story, right? This guy comes up to me in a pub in Bedford, this little shitty town I live in. Actually, it's a cool town, but he comes up to me and I'm in the cafe working. This guy, he's like, "Oh, hi, you Pete McCormack?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Oh, weird. I listened to your show." I was like, "Oh, right." And we end up having a coffee. And turns out he's from Syria and he's moved to England. And then about 4 months later, I get an email from, do you know Alex Gladstein from the Human Rights Foundation?
I do not know.
He's a guy who's worth following. So he works for the Human Rights Foundation, but he does a lot of work with Bitcoin and getting people to use Bitcoin. He messages me and he says, "Oh, there's this guy Mo. I think he's in England. You need to talk to him. He's a Syrian and he helps refugees use Bitcoin." I was like, "I think I know him. I think I've met him." So anyway, I got him on the other day. And what he does, he goes out to places like Turkey where the migrants and refugees are. And these people, they've got a challenge in that they're trying to get across Europe to find a home or get to their family, and all they've got, their worldly possessions, are their clothes, what they've got in their bag, and their phone. But also they've got a need to take money across multiple jurisdictions. The journey into Europe might be Turkey, Greece, wherever, to get to maybe a destination, whether it's Germany, Sweden, the UK. They can't go from country to country transferring the money, but what they can do is buy Bitcoin and take it all the way with them, which I think is a super interesting Bitcoin use case. Really interesting to talk about, but those shows have less interest, sadly.
Which is interesting in and of itself. I mean,
Yeah.
there is a day coming where that won't be the case, obviously. Now you do another podcast, Defiance.
Yes.
And I believe your travels, you're filming a documentary. Is that correct?
Yeah. So what it was, when I was doing the Defiance work, I kind of realized in traveling around that I think the video is more interesting than the interviews. I think you can get everyone to listen to a Bitcoin interview every week because they're like, number go up, I want to make more money and I want to learn about the tech and blah, blah, blah. And people they're just sponges for it. When you're doing a wide range of interviews, like I did one today about homelessness in London during coronavirus, and it's a harder story to tell, but if you could tell that story visually, I think people buy into it more. So I was like, another one of my things this year, I thought I would just start making films about some of the stuff I was doing. So I planned to go out to South America again, and I went to Chile first on my own. And then I went to Colombia, met this producer guy I know. He's been talking about working with me for a while. So he met me there. We did some filming in Colombia, then Venezuela and El Salvador. But I'd made the decision to go to Venezuela because so often Venezuela is talked about as the use case for Bitcoin. This is it. This is the opportunity. This is the perfect use case for Bitcoin. I was like, all right, cool. Let's go and see it. Let's go and see if it really is. And my experience was not what I thought it would be. So what I ended up doing is I kind of end up traveling for Defiance and Bitcoin. So I end up making a Bitcoin podcast, but making a Defiance film as well. So it all kind of merged into one, but interesting place.
Now, when you talk about Venezuela, like we've heard a lot of news about it, right? You know, it's like
Yeah.
we hear that people will even go across the border to go to a Bitcoin ATM machine, and you brought up some interesting points here about how the fact is, like, if you're in one of these, you know, developing countries and you get $100 worth of Bitcoin and it goes on a bull run, and now you got $300, $400, but then the converse thing happens sometimes where you get $100 and now you got $30, right? Uh, is Bitcoin the right solution for these developing countries due to that sort of, you know, massive fluctuation, or maybe a digital stable coin or something where the price is less volatile? Because I could see that, man, I got my $100 and I'm gonna, oh, it's $30 now. Like that could be heartbreaking to these folks. Like how do they manage that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of complication in this, and this is why you need to go and see it. And I was swept up in the whole Venezuela thing, but so let's talk about the border itself. So, I think we have to have a perspective on how much money people have or how little money people have to survive on. So, when I was at the border town of Cucuta, I ended up going to this NGO to do an interview with the director there, and there was some bloke in there. He's in my video, you see it. So there's some guy in there, and he's with his daughter and his wife. And he comes to me, and I can't speak Spanish, but it was translated. He said, am I a journalist? And I was like, oh, kind of. He said, well, can I talk to you? I want to talk about what's happening in Venezuela. I'm like, yeah, sure. So we sat down and we recorded it. He was very passionate, very anti-Maduro, very angry. And talking about how difficult life is. He'd come across the border because he's got 4 kids. His 3 other kids were with his parents, but his baby was with him and his wife. And he'd come to the border town to work, to try and find a job, to earn money, to send food back to his family. Hadn't found any work and spent a week literally living on the street. When we say living on the street, physically living on the street with a wife and a baby, every night worrying about being attacked. And afterwards, I was like, fuck this, I'll give him some money. So just hand in my pocket, pulled out, I think I had $100, and I gave him $60. And you'll see in the video, it's a really weird one, because I don't want to be like, oh, look at me giving money away like some virtue signal, because it was only fucking $60, right? We spend more than that on a pair of trainers, you know. So it's, in our world, it's not a lot of money. But if you go back and watch that video, I left the bit in where he hugs me. He really grabs me tight and he's crying. I was like, it's all right, mate. And then I said to him afterwards, because I hadn't got to the point where I'd understood the value of the money there. I was like, what was the deal with that? And he's like, you've given him enough money for him and his family to survive for 3 months. I was like, $60? He's like, yeah, that's 3 months. He said the average salary, the average salary is $5. So you're like, okay, I get it now. $5.
Crazy.
So and that's not enough to live on. So there's a lot of hustling. There's a lot of NGO charity work that are just feeding people. I went to one place that's feeding 9,000 people a day. And that's the majority of the people. I don't even know how the average works, but that is, everyone is fucking poor with little money. So when you start to think about Bitcoin, it does solve a problem. The problem it solves is middle class and upper class people in Venezuela who have money can turn their bolivars into Bitcoin. And then every week they can convert that back into bolivars and avoid the weekly 10% inflation. And even if Bitcoin drops heavily, because it's 10% weekly inflation or whatever the number is in Venezuela, they can avoid that. So it's really helpful if you're middle class and upper class. If you're poor, if you're the lower class, if you're in the slums, it's no fucking use at all. And there's a number of reasons why. So firstly, you have to use the bolivar in Venezuela. There's actually 5 currencies in Venezuela. There's the bolivar, the Colombian peso, the dollar, Bitcoin, and the petro. The petro is fucking useless. Some people use the Colombian peso because they're going across the border, but you have to use the bolivar because certain things you have to buy with it. Most people want the dollar, but it depends on where you are. So you want the dollar because it holds value, but you're often going to be buying things that are less than the dollar, and they don't have the denominations in USD. So the denomination of the change has to be done in the bolivar. So you really need the bolivar to survive when you're there. If you're on $5 a month, what you definitely don't need is, well, firstly, there's no culture of savings if you're on $5 a month. you live hand to mouth every month. So that's no use for you. Even if you wanted to use Bitcoin, every transaction you do is going to have a transaction fee. That's expensive. If it's 10 cents, 20 cents, that's really expensive when you might be wanting to buy something that's like 50 cents. So the only use of it is for anyone who wants to save and avoid hyperinflation. But the only people who can do that are those who are considered generally wealthy there. It is virtually no use to anyone else apart from remittance. So a lot of people don't have bank accounts. So for example, if you've got a family member who's outside of Venezuela, they might be in the States or something, and they want to send you some money, they can do that using Bitcoin, right? So that is, but the amount of people that are doing that is relatively low. So it's kind of a mixed picture. The picture is absolutely there is a use case, but it is small and it is for a certain group of people. The people of Venezuela don't need Bitcoin. They need democracy, and they need a removal of Maduro, who is essentially enslaving the people there into a horrible life. And that is what he's solving.
Yeah. I know you didn't have your visuals on your computer there, but through the power of technology, I found here's your Twitter stream, and there's this video right here. Why don't you tell us what's happening here?
Yeah, this is madness. So this is in Cucuta. This is the border town as you head towards Venezuela. Every one of these people on the side of the road, right? See the people chasing us?
Mm-hmm.
So there is the border police, Maduro's border guards. There are limitations to what you can bring into the country. Okay, because of those limitations, there are these illegal smuggling routes which are run by the paramilitaries. So all of these people, they're coming up to you and saying, "Do you need something taken into Venezuela?" Because the way a large amount of people in Venezuela survive is they survive by the fact that people are bringing things in they need, certain things that are considered contraband that they want in the country. So every one of these people is hoping that you are somebody who wants to deliver something into the country for your family. They'll negotiate, and maybe you'll pay them 50 cents or $1, and they'll go through the paramilitary route to take it into the country. And it's crazy. There's so many of them there.
I've got I was in Medellin, Colombia,
cool.
over Christmas. And while we were there, we met a young man. His name was Juan Pablo, and entrepreneurial. His family's in Venezuela, and he does tours. We met him because we booked a TripAdvisor tour of the Camino, where they've got, the artwork, all the graffiti there in Medellin, and cool guy. And he was telling us how he needs to go to the border regularly to bring money to his family. They'll go and meet him there at the border, and he'll hand them whatever he can and turn around and go back.
Yeah, it's a really, really desperate situation. And what is quite interesting is that there's a lot of propaganda that still exists, Chavismo propaganda that exists, and there's a lot of anti-US rhetoric that still exists. I mean, you can go, there's I don't know if you know Grey Zone as a news organization. That's Max Blumenthal and Ben Norton. But they will often talk about things like, with the new Trump rhetoric of Maduro being a narco criminal, that this is the US is attempting to possibly going to be declaring war on Venezuela, a sovereign state with an elected leader. But it's fucking bullshit that they would, sorry for my language, they would say stuff like that. They're essentially given a shield to a dictator who has absolutely destroyed that country, who has supported and backed his cronies, at the same time has destroyed his economy to the point where, I mean, we're talking millions have fled the country. Those who are left are hungry, although the economy has been improving recently, but they are hungry and they're struggling to get work. You stand on the border and tens of thousands of people every day are coming across to get essentials that they either can't buy in Venezuela or they can't afford. Now, it's really important that people recognize and see the truth of what's happening in the country, because there are bad actors out there who will misreport what is happening in the country.
Mm. And I have a question here because I mean we talked. I mean, some people may not even be aware of how the buying power of the bolivar has just over time just completely the bottom fell out. Like I remember
Yeah.
it used to be like what 3 bolivar to buy a cup of coffee, and now it's something ridiculous. I want to see if these numbers right here. I'm going to share my screen here. Are these accurate? Like
Yeah, probably.
is it ridiculous amount of? I mean, and how do people pay for things in bolivar if it costs 15 million bolivar to buy a chicken?
So that was quite an interesting thing because I thought that. I mean, I don't know what the stage is now. They always debase the currency anyway. But what was quite interesting, I found out when I was there, is one of my handler who was taking me around. He said we've probably got the most digitized um, monetary system in the world. So they all use an app. I think it's a bit like, I never saw it, but I think it's a bit like Venmo in terms of paying each other. That's what everyone uses now. I think because it became so ludicrous and so difficult to keep printing money, keep printing new notes as they had to keep debasing the currency, as they kept debasing the currency. So they actually, it's all digitized now, apart from dollars.
What if you don't have a phone? Like that's like you're so poor you don't have a phone. Like how do you manage?
So it does exist. The Bolivar does exist, but I think I was told like 85% of transactions are now with the app, and that phone thing is an issue, by the way, as well. So when I was at the border town, there was a guy giving a Bitcoin class, but he said some of the challenges are: firstly, some people don't have phones. If they do, they share phones, and even if they've got their own phone, they might not be able to afford a data contract. And then when they get back to Venezuela, there might be blackouts, so they can't even charge their phone. So that is another issue with it. I mean, the conclusion I kept coming back to is that we should stop referring to Venezuela as the opportunity for Bitcoin in terms of the people, because it isn't right. It doesn't exist. The opportunity for the people will come with a new government, hopefully, which comes from the people rising up and removing Maduro. I don't think that will happen, but he has too much of a grip over that country. And sadly, the Bitcoin it's like most things in life, right? If you throw this coronavirus stuff, you've probably seen out in the US, the reports recently that the inequality, it's a lens for the inequality in terms of those who are getting sick and dying. And I think it's a lens for society that coronavirus is affecting the poorest people. And it's the kind of reverse is true with Bitcoin. It's such a great tool, but it only helps the richest people. It's not a tool for the poorest. And I'm certainly not spinning that narrative anymore. And I'm very careful about spinning it about any location until I've been there and seen it, because you got to see this stuff firsthand. Yeah.
I found some photos here on your Facebook. Let's go through a few of these and just tell us what we're looking at here.
That's in Chile. That's not in that's in Chile. So when I was in Chile, I was there during the riots. I don't know if you know, but there's been riots now, daily riots have been going on for months and months now. Eventually, yeah, this is Chile.
Is all Chile that we're looking at here?
Yeah. So what happened in Chile is there's two, like everywhere, there's a lot of inequality and a lot of corruption. Now, if you're anti-state, fair enough. I get that, the anarcho-capitalist, but there is a state here, and the poorest people are going to work and paying their taxes, and all they're seeing is corruption and inequality. They had a change to the pension system, which basically said you had to go with a private pension rather than a state pension, but they didn't take into any consideration your age. So if you were 60 and you're 5 years away from retirement, you had no time to put any money in your pension. So that pissed a lot of people off. But the trigger for the riots was what seemed like an innocuous thing. They raised the price of the metro ticket, and it was by like such a small amount, like a few cents. But really, that was essentially another tax on the poorest people, because it was the poorest people who used the metro to get in and out of Santiago to come and do the jobs. They can't live in the center because it's too expensive. And that just triggered the riots. And it was really interesting. And one of my friends reminded me, that's like a sign. They said, we're not from the left, we're not from the right, we're from below. And it was a kind of, whenever you get inequality and too much inequality, you're always going to have protests. And here right now in Chile, there is a lot of inequality. So the daily riots. I was there for 3 days. I saw them. I was in the middle of them. I did some filming, quite naively.
Did you do some rioting too? Did you like destroy some things?
No, I just kind of ran around with my camera and my neck scarf on because I got tear gas for my first time, which
God.
Stuck.
My mom would be freaking out. Get out of there! What are you doing in Chile right now? Like if you had some family members just like freaking out because you're in some of these crazy zones.
Well, my dad did. My dad was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I'm just going to go and film it and be on the edge." And I showed him the stuff afterwards. And I was a bit naive. I went straight into the middle of a riot with a film camera and just started filming. And it definitely was naive. But I'm not going to lie. At the same time, I never felt like I wanted to be anywhere more. Yeah, obviously I want to be with my children all the time, but outside of wanting to be with my children, I felt like I really wanted to be here and see this and document this because there wasn't any mainstream press there. It was just people like with blogs and Instagrams going around filming it, and it was really interesting. I really, really enjoyed it.
I think when we put a face on it, it makes all the difference. And I found this picture on Twitter of you with this kid here. Who's this?
Yeah, so this is in Venezuela. So on my final day, so I'd met this MP who works for Guaido, and she was telling me about an NGO up in one of the slums. And what they do every day, they feed 200 to 300 mothers and their children. So it's for women and children only. These people have got no money. If somebody doesn't give them food, they don't eat. So this NGO takes them in every day. It takes the kids in the morning, feeds them. They go off to school and they come back afterwards, and then they have dinner. So they invited me down to visit it. And as I walked in, this little kid runs up to me. He has Down syndrome, and he just ran up to me and put his arms around me, and then just wouldn't let go of me and just kind of stayed with me the whole time. He was really sweet. But what was really interesting was watching him, the way he just went around the room, oblivious to the situation he was in. Like, I'm imagining some of these kids can comprehend it. They can comprehend they are poor. They can comprehend that they are living in a slum, and they can comprehend that they have a tough life. He obviously could not comprehend this. It didn't cross his mind. So he was just going around the room like shaking people's hands, and he'd give them a hug and a kiss. And yeah, he was adorable, and it was a really nice thing to see during a really tough trip, since someone had all this love in them to give
That's
out.
Great.
Because I spoke to the mums, like the mums are stressed as fuck, right? They're really going through a really tough situation, not knowing daily how they'll feed their kids.
Peter, where can people see more of the video and pictures from your experience?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter. It's at Peter McCormack. Or if you want to watch the films, I've got a new YouTube channel. It's Defiance TV. But the best way to find it is just go to my website, defiance.news. There's a tab for the podcast and a tab for the films. The 2 films are up there. My 3rd film about what happened at the border of Turkey and Greece has come in. And check that out as well.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us for Virtual Blockchain Week. We really appreciate you. You guys check out Pete's stuff. Check out What Bitcoin Did. The only show in the Bitcoin universe that's better than ours. That's okay. Maybe all of them are better than ours. But thanks, man.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Pete.
it.